Hey, ladies and gentlemen, this is Mr. Green. I'm recording Unit 4.2, Study 2, and we're going to be covering bias. And there's a little cartoon here, and it says, I think your test grading is biased in favor of students who answer the test questions correctly. I don't know. Do you think teachers are biased that way or not? I don't know. I just wanted to make certain we all know where we're at and what's going on here. This is the course right here. As you can see it, I'm got it here in the window. And where we're at, we're in the first unit that we have here is Unit 4, and we're going along. We've done studies 1 and 2 and 4.1. Should have completed all that, and we're now into 4.2, these surveys. And we did study 1 last time. This is study 2 right here. As you can see, we are quickly approaching the end of Unit 4, in which there will be a test, and you need to be prepared for it. We will be covering this wrap up next time in the discussion a little bit. We do in Class Connects, we are talking about some of these things and covering some things that you need to be aware of. So I would make certain that I come to the Class Connects and make certain you're getting some information there. Okay? And let's see, what are we going to learn about bias today? Let's see here. Bias. A systematic error in measuring the estimate in favor of certain outcomes. Well, teachers tend to favor certain outcomes, and systematic error in measuring the estimate. Oh, anything that causes data to be wrong. The point here is it could be attributed to the researchers, it could be attributed to the respondent, or to the method that you're using to sample the data. Anything can introduce bias. To that end, I also want to go back to the course just for a second here and point out to you, I've put something in the Webology here. So here in the Webology is a little TED Talk. Now, TED is a group of think tank people, and it's called the optimism bias. If you watch this TED Talk, it's about 15 minutes long. It talks about biases that we have based upon optimism. Optimism can cause a bias. Watch the talk and let's talk about it, discuss it a little bit in our Class Connect when we have it next time. So move forward here a little bit. So what are some sources of biases? Some things that can cause bias in your sample. You cannot do anything with bad data. Remember, if we get bad data, it's misleading us. We don't want to have bad data. So what are some things that can cause bias in your sample? One of the things we need to talk about here is voluntary response. This is when people choose to respond to a situation. This is usually only people with very strong opinions that respond. So those people that have very mild opinions or people who don't care at all never respond to these type of voluntary responses. Remember, the way you determine voluntary response is with self-selection. The people voluntarily decide to do it. Another method that comes up is convenience sampling. This is asking people who are easy to ask. This produces biased results. I mean, just asking people that are convenient. An example would be the surveys that magazines ask readers to respond to. Another example are these reality shows like American Idol, where they're asking people to call in and vote for their favorites. The respondents select themselves, okay, and to participate in the survey. So you could say that it's self-selection, but it's a convenient sample. That's what we're looking at here. Okay? Okay. It produces a bias. The data obtained by this convenient sample will be biased. It is often used for surveys and results reported in newspapers, but it is still biased. Okay? One method of a convenient sample would be stopping a friendly-looking person in the mall to ask them a survey. Another example is surveys that are left on tables at restaurants. The only people who fill them out are people who have complaints or people who have very good comments to make. Therefore, it's a convenience sample and it will be biased one way or the other. Okay? Another thing that can cause some bias is undercoverage. This is when some groups of the population are left out of the selection process entirely. Just not covered at all. Okay? Suppose you take a random sample selecting names from a phone book. Well, what are some groups that would not be covered? Well, you wouldn't cover people with uh, with unlisted phone numbers because they're not going to be in the phone book, are they? And those are usually some high income families that might have unlisted phone numbers. You're going to people that don't have phone numbers at all. Those might be some low income families. So you're leaving out the high income families and the low income families. What about people with cell phones? They're not in the phone books normally. So you're leaving out a whole age group of people who have cell phones. And almost everyone has a cell phone now. So just using a phone book to look up names would be an improper way of doing it nowadays. Okay? Another thing that causes some bias is non-response. This occurs when individuals chosen for the sample couldn't be contacted or refused to cooperate. An example of this are telephone surveys. I mean, we all get them, and when we get them, I know that first thing I do is hang up on them. I don't care to respond to a telephone survey, but I was selected as an individual for that survey, and I just refused to cooperate with it. It was a non-response. Okay? Okay? It's almost the opposite of self-selected because they're not wanting to be a part of it. It's often non-responsive because they just didn't respond to the survey. Okay? This is a major problem because a lot of telemarketing groups are using telephone surveys, and in the past few years they've gotten tons of people that don't respond or hang up on them just like I do. So it is a huge issue. One way to help the problem of non-response is to make follow-up contact with the people who are not at home when you first tried to contact them, or try to call them again. So recalling and things like that sometimes helps. Now, the response bias occurs when the behavior of the respondent or the interviewer cause bias in the samples and will get wrong answers. Let's see here. The example I hear, oh, wait a second. The response bias occurs when some people, for some reason, the interviewer or respondent's fault, you get incorrect answers. Suppose you wanted to survey high school students on a drug abuse, and we use a uniformed police officer to interview each student in our sample. Do you think we'd get honest answers? Do you think the answers would be exactly what we wanted to hear? Or would be representative of everything that's going on? No, the fact that you've got a uniformed officer there taking the responses would probably influence or bias the results. And that's what we're talking about. Okay? That's called a response bias. Sometimes the wording of the questions can cause you to have problems. Wording can influence answers that are given. Connotation of words can cause all sorts of problems. The use of big words or technical words can cause all sorts of problems. Questions must be worded as neutral as possible to avoid influencing the response. Okay? For example, the level of vocabulary appropriate for the population you are surveying. If you were surveying a bunch of people out of Podunk, Texas, you'd probably want to avoid complex vocabulary. If you were surveying doctors, then you could use a more complex technical wording. But you've got to be aware of who you're surveying and the audience that you're trying to get to there. Okay, here's a little quiz. Source of the bias. Before the presidential election of 1936, FDR, that's Franklin Delano Roosevelt, against Republican Alf Landon, the magazine Literary Digest predicting Landon winning the election in a 3-2 victory. A survey of 2.8 million people. George Gallup surveyed only 50,000 people and predicted that Roosevelt would win. The Digest survey came from magazine subscribers, car owners, telephone directories, etc. What was the source of bias here? Now, here's a clue. Landon lost. So this literary magazine that predicted a 3-2 victory didn't get it right. FDR won. Gallup poll, who did 50,000 people, got it right. What was the Digest's source of bias that they had there? Well, what I want to show you is that they did an undercoverage. Since the digest survey came from car owners, etc., the people selected were mostly from the high income families, and thus mostly Republican. Other answers are possible here. This is just one of the many possible answers that could have come up, but this is the way I would have answered this one, is that this would have been an undercoverage. We didn't get the entire population that we needed to get covered here. Okay? So suppose you wanted to estimate the total amount of money spent by students on textbooks each semester at SMU. You collect register receipts for students as they leave the bookstore during lunch one day. What was the source of the bias here? What's wrong with this? Why wouldn't this work? Well, it's a convenience sampling. It was an easy way to collect some data, to go at lunchtime and pick up the receipts from the register. It also might be an undercoverage. Students who buy books online or at bookstores from the online bookstores are not included in here. And maybe we needed to look at it from a different perspective. Maybe we need to get a different group of students. Okay? Let's do one more here. What if we wanted to find the average value of a home in Plano? One averages the price of the homes that are listed for sale with the retailer. Does that seem like a valid method? Well, there's a bias here. We're trying to find the average value of a home, not just the homes for sale. So maybe what we're doing here is we're under coverage. We're leaving out homes that are not for sale or homes that are listed with different realtors. There are other answers to this question as well, but the whole point here is when you're looking at a survey, sometimes it's nice to look for these topics that we were just talking about to see what their bias is, to see if that bias would have greatly impacted the actual results. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about bias. Okay? Well, that's all I've got for you today. Let's go back to that first slide here. See if I can get this to move out of the way a little bit and go back to that first slide. And look at that cartoon again. Oh, there it was. Went right past it. I think your test grading is biased in favor of students who answer test questions correctly. What bias are we talking about here? Is it undercoverage? I don't know. Is it sampling size? Is it, what? Which one do you think it is? Think about it. Maybe we could talk about this during our discussion in Class Connect. I look forward to seeing you. Bye.